Hey, Facebook friends, Marianne here. As you all know, today was the anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King in Washington, D.C. And there's some remarkable things that have transpired over the years that I've been learning about my own family's fight as civil rights activists. Now, I know that I grew up learning all about how my grandparents, Josie Thompson and Margaret Philp Thompson, fought very, very hard to help integrate the State Fair of Texas and risk their own families' lives, for it. I grew up learning all sorts of things, largely about them. And I knew my father said that his stance for LGBT rights largely came from learning about his own father's work, and to not follow in the same line and standing up for human rights would be like, in his words, spitting in his father's eyes. So, I grew up with that understanding, but I really have been on a journey these number of last years, finding out that what I felt were my personal decisions about my day-to-day life was really, in a major sense and a deep spiritual sense, a continuation of what my grandparents began and my father continued. My dad was a very humble man. He did so many different things, but he got many, many awards and recognitions for it, but he didn't brag. He certainly wasn't like me in posting things on Facebook. But he used his position to make really big inroads for social justice. And sometimes that meant speaking out. But most of the time, what I've started learning was how he used his position as CEO of major corporations to make those kinds of differences happen. I have learned a lot of things. One of them, I'm going to try and show you this from my computer screen here. There's this wonderful man, and his name is Romeo Rodriguez. I'm hoping that you can see his face right here. Anyway, Romeo Rodriguez was very important because when I was receiving a award at the Mexican Art Museum a number of years ago, I was also the keynote speaker. And so he was assigned to interview me. And he was in charge of writing articles for a Latino newspaper. And so as we sat and we started talking, he started telling me stories. And he explained to me that when he was a student, he was an activist, and that it was really not welcomed up there at the University of Texas to allow Latinos, Hispanics to aspire to get a degree beyond getting a bachelor's degree. So if they wanted a master's or doctorate, it wasn't easy at all. And he said my dad would go to meetings as a distinguished alumni, and after various board meetings or whatever my dad was doing, and this was a decade or so before I was born. But after he would go and, in those meetings, then he would sneak off and meet with Romeo and his friends. And he would tell them where they needed to be and what time they needed to be there in order to protest the right things and get the attention from the right people. And he was basically their insider person. And no one suspected this very quiet, Southern gentleman man, in a suit, CEO title, going over there, and never realized that he was going over there and telling the students how and when to protest. So this really touched me deeply, and the reason why I'm sharing that is I have recently been very blessed to get to meet a really good friend of Isabel Rosignol's, and Isabel is my PR person, but long before she did PR, she worked with Martin Luther King and leading the students in Louisiana. So all the various campuses, the students throughout the state of Louisiana, in doing their protests for with the MLK in order to fight for desegregation. And in order to do that, she ended up working with other people who were in charge of various components of various regions. And one of the people who MLK had assigned in the South was Reverend Peter Johnson. Now, he and Isabel have known each other since back then, and I finally got to meet him when I went with some friends. Tamara, you were also there, Alaya, a lot of you were there, and we went down to McAllen. And as some of you know, and you've seen some of my own videos, we stood in front of the bus. And the whole reason for standing in front of the bus and holding it up was so that we could help the press get proof that these children are in cages, and they are. And anyway, there's something that happens when you are putting yourself in front of a bus like that and taking this chance, and you don't know if you're going to be arrested or what the outcome is going to be. And doing that with somebody, it's a bonding. Let's just say it's a bonding. And so I was so amazed. While many of us were like, oh, the heat, or, it was Reverend Peter Johnson that had the most passion and strength to stand out there in front of this bus. And so I was just in awe of this man. And that's when Isabel and he, informed us, guess what? This is not our first rodeo. We did this kind of thing a long time ago. And I started learning more and more about that. So anyway, fast forward. Most recently, we've had Robbie Rogbier, who's been coming in and helping to train, different ministers, rabbis, imams in the DFW area to be able to handle the unique situations and challenges posed by ICE. So anyway, so all that aside, so I've been blessed to get to spend a little more time with Peter Johnson. And so tonight, we invited him to come over to our office, and he came to the building, and he walks in, and I give him a tour of the building, and then he comes into a table, and it's a table that my dad used to have in his office. And we also keep a painting, or it was a photograph that was painted on top of McWhorter, and it was something that I'd commissioned just a long time ago of my grandmother and my two uncles and my dad. And he stops and he pauses and he looks, wait a minute. He's like, who's your dad again? And I tell him, John Philp Thompson, the one in the middle. And he goes, wait a minute. He said, I'm getting chills. I said, why? He said, the last time I really spent any time here, he said, it was in the 1960s. Segregation was still very strong. And this area was all white. And there was a place called the Stoneleigh P where you could get burgers, but only white people would go there. And again, this was before desegregation. And he said, I went in there and sat down there to get a burger, and your father had agreed to come in. And so all these people are staring at me, and your father came in and sat across from me, and they're all in shock because here's this powerful CEO who's white, and he sits down and he split a burger with me. And we just sat there and talked about how to help Black employment in the city and his company and the state, etc. How do we enhance greater opportunities for Black people? And he said, as we're sitting there sharing that burger, all these people are just staring. And he said, and now I have chills because Stoneleigh P is only a short distance from where you are now. And I'm looking at this painting and I'm realizing that, the connection. Well, that just blew me away. And that's why I had to share with you, because it's hard sometimes doing this work, and I don't do nearly the amount that someone like Peter Johnson or other people do. And I'm deeply humbled by looking at them and Robbie Rogbier and others, people like the Reverend Neil Casares Thomas and others who are doing amazing things. Alalia, so many of you, Dallas Peace and Justice Center. I mean, people with the Southern Poverty Law Center. So many of you are doing things. Chief Juan Mancias, I am in awe of you. And, you hope and you pray that what you're doing is making a difference in the world. And meanwhile, things are changing. I grew up in a state where when I was 5 days old, about 10, my parents adopted me, and then 10 days later, they had a party to introduce me to their friends. And my parents told me half the people got up and left in protest because it was an interracial adoption. And as I grew older, I ended up experiencing, you go to North Park, and whoever I was on a date with, sometimes if we went to North Park, we'd get spat on because we were interracial. So I saw that side of the South, but I also saw it changing. I saw so much diversity. I see interracial families with their children pushing the baby carts out at North Park. I see people working together and seeing the value of each other, and I've seen incredible healing over time. Ken Campbell was this amazing soul that was with the Mimsy Institute and was in charge of our interfaith, interracial outreach, and did incredible work. And only after years of his doing that did we find out his great-grandfather was leading the Ku Klux Klan to burn crosses in my grandparents' yard. And I remember him saying, guess what? You won. I'm in charge of your interracial interfaith program. So, things do change. And I know things are dark right now. And I know many of us are going, oh my God, what's going to happen next? But I have seen this. I have seen the hope. And maybe if it doesn't change in one generation, it changes in another generation. I sat in the Brook Hollow Country Club and listened to a woman who was in her 80s crying and asking for forgiveness because she would play bridge, find out when my grandparents were going to be home, and go back, tell her husband and his friends, and they put on their cone hats and go burn the cross in the yard. And when she confessed all this to me, I saw her son in his 60s, a powerful man, look horrified, look disgusted, look revolted. And when she asked for forgiveness, I said, it's not for me to do. It's not for me to give. But I will say the fact that I'm seeing your son look disgusted by all this and horrified by all this tells me you taught him something different. And she said, yes. I remember holding her hand and seeing both her and her son's eyes tear up. And she said, this makes so much sense that you're the one I'm telling this to. And that was something I was told way back in 6th grade because I was given a homework assignment. Well, these things are how the world changes. So on this day, if I have a dream, I too have a dream. I have a dream that we will get past this. I have a dream that we will be able to recognize our common humanity. I have a dream that when I look into your eyes and see you have a need, regardless of what demographic it is, even if you're a white supremacist or loves Trump or whatever, that I can see in you a human being worthy of love and justice, and in every way whose human rights are equal to my own. And if I can have compassion and empathy for where you're coming from, that we can find common ground and move forward and building and forging a nation into something beautiful, remarkable, that gives us all the opportunity to rise up and evolve with humanity. And the way that Thomas Jefferson believed, he believed that we were, our democracy was a great experiment that was going to be constantly evolving. He said he hoped, his greatest hope was that people in the future would see him and the other founding fathers who in their day and age were seen as rebellious, that we would one day see them as antiquated. And we do. We see the holding of slaves as so antiquated. He dreamed one of us being so one day. So now I dream that far into the future, one day people will look back and be like, you put children in cages? You made somebody with brown skin walk around with a passport and have to show it to police? You did what? I think that will happen. And I believe in my heart of hearts that our nation is good enough and solid enough, and the souls that make it up and you and me are beautiful enough and strong enough that we will make that reality happen. And we will see a much better nation on the way to healing in the next 5, 10, 15 years. It's going to be hard, but I know we can get there because we've been in much worse places before. And you know what happens? It's not always the person that we remember who's famous and saying, I have a dream, and MLK was so important. There are so many other people like Peter Johnson, Isabel Vazinal, so many other people like the very Reverend James Parks Morton that did their part of that. So I know many of you right now are out there and you're depressed because you're going, oh my God, not another thing. But guess what? What you do matters. How you speak up matters. I've shared this story with many of you before, but my mom was at the Pocalo Country Club just a few years ago. And one woman said, I can't stand those gay people. And then the next person was a big long table of socialites, powerful names you'd probably recognize. And one by one, they went around. When they came to my mom, she was the last one. She said, well, actually, I have no problem. The gay people in my neighborhood, they have the best lawn in the whole neighborhood, and I love it, and that's as much as it affects me. And as far as friends go, I've had gay people who are friends all my life. I love them. I have no problem with them. And the woman next to her went, well, to be honest, I just said I had a problem with it because I thought you all would say that. And it went around 360 degrees again, and they realized none of them had a problem. That is the power of speaking out. So I want to encourage you to have a dream, to say, I have a dream. That one day, yes, a little white girl and a little black girl will go and play and know each other. But guess what? A little brown girl, someone like me, will one day be able to graduate and have someone else who comes over to her on that graduation and says, I'm sorry I was so hard on you, but I had someone in my family who was a member of Ku Klux Klan, and I thought the only way to honor them was to carry on their values. And now I know I can honor them without carrying on, those particular values. I can pick and choose and honor them and still honor myself. And I'm sorry for the hell I gave you because of that. That was the greatest high school gift I ever got when I graduated. And that really happened. So it doesn't take decades. It can happen in lifetimes. And you and I can be part of the healing of our nation that we need. And when I take a look at my life and I realize all these choices that I thought were just myself as an individual, and I start realizing in a moment like tonight when Peter Johnson is standing there over the table that my dad made some of the hardest decisions of his life, and he looks at the picture and he goes, your father during the time that it was segregated, went to an all-white place with me and sat down and shared a burger with me to talk openly and in public about the importance of helping African Americans have better opportunities, Black employment. And everyone was shocked. And that happened just a few doors down. And now I see her doing this. That tells me, just like with my other friend, Romeo, that tells me that my dad cared and continued the work of his parents. And while he never told me to do that very specific thing, that lets me know that he planted those seeds in me. And right now, I want to offer what I have to you. And I know so many of you doing amazing work around the world, and I applaud you. But continue to plant those seeds, knowing that some, maybe not all, but even if just one takes root, you have changed the world, and who knows where it's going to be. So those are my thoughts on this day, the anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech. Know that I love you, and I believe that we are going to change this world for the better, and we already are. The news keeps us depressed, and there's a lot of truth, and we do have to pay attention to the news. I'm not ignorant of what's going on out there, but all of us are a part of the solution. That's what I want to share with you. Stay inspired.